Okay, I think we're there.
Yes, we are.
Okay, everybody, thanks for coming tonight. Barbara already gave me a great introduction. Thank you. Dave and I moved to Florida here about 5 years ago, and we were looking around for a place to volunteer. And we went to a number of meetings, and we went to some different organizations, and we landed in the Florida Native Plant Society, and we are still here. The Florida Native Plant Society was established in 1980 and granted status as a 501c3 corporation in 1987. Our mission, as Barbara told you, closely aligns with the goals of the Conservancy. So we're sort of sister organizations here. The Mangrove Chapter was established in the mid-1980s as the Charlotte Harbor Native Plant Society. It became affiliated with the Florida Native Plant Society a few years later and renamed itself the Mangrove Chapter. The Native Plant Society has about 33 chapters across the state of Florida, and about half of them have named themselves after native plants. We chose the red mangrove because of our location on the coast and because of its essential nature in protecting young fish and shorelines. Our service area is South Sarasota and Charlotte counties. So about 4 or 5 years ago, a group of our volunteers at the state level decided that they needed something to help people who were just moving to Florida. And as a matter of fact, most of us have moved here from somewhere else. But it was directed primarily to snowbirds and to newcomers, but it has a lot of information packed into its format, and it's really good for anybody who lives in Florida. Welcome to Florida. When you move to Florida, we suggest that you get to know your elected officials. Here in Northport, we have found that our elected officials are approachable, friendly, welcoming, and really anxious to know what's important to you. So if you think that the environment is important, let the officials know that you support them in their efforts to protect it. I was at a commission meeting this afternoon, and they're real people. They're pleasant and easy to be around. The next thing you should do is learn about the environment of Florida. Now, Florida is not just one environment. We range from the Panhandle to the Keys, and we've got a lot of different environments. Of course, part of that environment is the state of mind. We all like that. One thing we need to do is to respect Florida's wildlife. The gopher tortoise and the Florida scrub jay are both favorites of the Conservancy and, of course, of mangrove too. The gopher tortoise is a keystone species. That means if this species were removed from its habitat, the habitat would collapse or at least be vastly changed. Another reason the gopher tortoise is a keystone species is because it shares its burrow with as many as 350 other animals during times of peril. That's everything from beetles to rattlesnakes, from mice to other little animals, and they all declare a truce when they're down there. The snakes don't eat the mice don't eat the insects, so they all are one big happy family until they leave again. If you run across a gopher tortoise burrow, please be aware of the white sandy portion at the entrance. This is called the apron, and it's where the gopher tortoises often lay their eggs. You don't want to step on that and accidentally crush the eggs or crush the baby tortoises inside. Now, scrub jays. If you've ever been to a park where there are Florida scrub jays, and you probably have, you will know that they are curious, friendly, gregarious birds. However, they should spend their time foraging for acorns to stash for the winter, rather than interacting with humans. They have been known to sit on your hat, drink water from the lid of your water bottle, and of course, they eat foods that people offer them. Humans offer them oatmeal because it's a natural food. Well, it's not natural for the scrub jay. People offer them peanuts because that's also a natural food. However, if a scrub jay buries a peanut, that peanut can begin to rot. It gets a fungus. If the scrub jay tries to feed it to a chick, it could sicken the chick, it could make it die. So even though they're friendly, try to resist the friendly scrub jays. Feeding wildlife in general in Florida is not an act of kindness. We have plenty of food in our native habitat to feed all our native creatures. Finally, if you find what you think is an orphan animal, it's probably not an orphan. Parents go out to forage during the daytime to feed themselves and their young. They have to put the baby someplace safe while they are gone, so they hide it as best they can. Then they come back for it at the end of the day. If you find a baby animal that appears to be alone, leave it alone until the end of the day. If you want to go back at the end of the day and check to see if it's still there, and you find it, then please call Florida Fish and Wildlife or call your local animal rescue service. They have the knowledge and the facilities to help these young young animals. And the animals will stand a far better chance of survival than if you try to take them in and nurse them yourselves. Be careful on beaches. Our beaches are probably the most popular habitat we have in Florida. Everybody loves beaches. Well, almost everybody, but even pets love beaches. It's probably best to leave your dog at home during nesting season. Dogs love the beach. They love to run and bark and jump and dig and all those things that dogs enjoy doing. However, these normal behaviors for a dog can really harm our wildlife. Digging can disturb sea turtle nests or seabird nests. Just running and barking, even if it's a distance away, can alarm seabirds. They may fly off the nest, they may fly off the eggs or nestlings, and they may not return if they are too startled. So it's safest for everyone if you just leave the dog at home during nesting season. Watch out for sea turtle nests. As you can see, almost there, sea turtle nests are often marked with stakes and bright red tape by volunteers on Turtle Watch. Please stay away from these areas. You don't want to walk on the turtle eggs. You never know when the nestlings are going to hatch. It usually takes a couple of months, but nature is unpredictable, as always. If you enjoy with your kids building sandcastles, digging moats around them, or just digging giant holes to see if you can find china, please level out the beach again before you go home. Baby turtles can fall into the holes. Adult turtles can run into castles and not be able to find their way around. So make a game of it with the kids. Demolish the castles, but tell them why. It's to help save the baby sea turtles. Keep the beach tidy. We know that you're going to carry your trash out, but if you are lucky enough to live on the beach, be sure that during nesting season, you take in your furniture at night and take in your umbrellas, because again, adult sea turtles can become entangled in the beach furniture or in the umbrellas, and they can either give up nesting for that night or they can give up nesting for the entire season. Now, as I mentioned, we have lots of local different habitats in Florida. We are far more than just palm trees and beaches. Each of the chapters was assigned for the Good Citizen Guide to outline 7 habitats in their own area, to take photos of them, and to write descriptions of them. We were also told to design 3 specific gardens, photograph them, and make descriptions. So we're going to talk a little about the 7 habitats that you can find locally. First, we have dry local habitats. Scrub. Scrub is really common in our area. For a while, I thought that all of Florida was scrub because we have so much down here, but it's not that common elsewhere. Scrub is characterized by mostly woody shrubs with patches of bare white sand, and it's found on old dunes with deep, well-drained sandy soils. It's the natural home of scrub jays and of gopher tortoises. Scrub jays need those patches of white sand to bury their acorns. Locally, you can find scrub at Amberjack Park, Oscar Shearer State Park, Duet Preserve in Manatee County, and Tippecanoe Environmental Park. Next is dry mesic hammock. Now, I had to look up mesic. It means an average, well-balanced amount of moisture. I'm not quite sure how we can have a dry mesic hammock, but that's one of our habitats. It includes trees like oak, slash pine, and sable palm, which create dense canopies of shade. Sandy soils are common and support understory plants like saw palmetto. The massive oaks host an array of bromeliads. You can find dry mesic hammock at Alligator Creek Preserve, Chelks Preserve, if we ever can get in there again after road construction, Myakka River State Park, and our very own Oaks Park. Mesic flatwoods have a high canopy of tall pine trees over an understory of grasses and saw palmetto. Wildflowers flourish in the sandy soil, and small basin marshes may dot the area. I have to comment on this photo. It's one of my own photos, and almost all of these are my own photos. But this looks like so many of the parks where we lead guided hikes. It's a very familiar environment. Locally, you can find mesic flatwoods at Charlotte Flatwoods Park, at Deep Creek Preserve, at Myakka State Forest, and at Oscar Shearer State Park. Next, we have moist local habitats. Mangrove swamps are in brackish areas inundated by tides. Allowing little diversity, the salt-tolerant mangrove species include black, red, and white mangroves, as well as buttonwood. It might interest you to know that even though these are all called mangroves, they are not related to each other. They enjoy the same habitat, the swampy water there, but they are in different plant families. Mangroves are critical to protecting coastlines and provide protection for young fish. Additionally, they offer the best protection from beach erosion and function far better than seawalls. In our area, you can find mangrove swamps at Charlotte Harbor Preserve State Park, Lemon Bay Park and Environmental Center, and Emerson Point Preserve in Manatee County. Closely related to mangrove swamps are estuaries. Estuaries occur where salty water from the ocean mixes with fresh water, usually from a river. The estuary is often partially cut off from the ocean and may contain channels, sloughs, mud and sand flats, lagoons, and bays. We happen to live in an area that has several prominent estuaries, and we are lucky that way. Places you can find them are many of the places you can find mangrove forests, such as Charlotte Harbor Preserve State Park, Lemon Bay Park and Environmental Center, and Oyster Creek Environmental Park. Basin marshes are shallow depressions usually found in areas with sandy soils and in fire-maintained areas such as dry prairies. Vegetation includes grasses on the outer edges, with aquatic species like pickleweed and water lily in the deeper section. You can find nearby basin marshes at Myakka Islands Point Preserve, Duet Preserve, Babcock Webb Wildlife Management Area, and Charlotte Flatwoods Park. I have to say a few words about Charlotte Flatwoods Park. It's a little bit of a drive, probably farther than some of the parks that you frequent often, but it really is one of my favorite parks. It's got quite a variety of habitats, and it's got a very large basin marsh, just acres and acres. There is a little point where you can walk out. It's like a peninsula out into the marsh, so that you're just surrounded on three sides by all these reeds, by water lilies. It's really beautiful. If you haven't been to Charlotte Flatwoods, I suggest that you go there. The last habitat I'm going to talk about is coastal grassland habitats. These coastal areas support a moderate diversity of salt-tolerant species such as sea oats and railroad vine, which both anchor shorelines, and saw palmetto, sea grape, and prickly pear cactus farther inland. Nearby coastal grasslands are at Blind Pass Beach, Casperson Beach, and Stump Pass Beach. Now that you've learned about local habitats, we're going to talk about your yard. Those of you who are reading along with the Conservancy's book club in Nature's Best Hope are familiar with Doug Tallamy's concept of the homegrown national park. His vision is that we can turn half of all the yards in the United States into native habitat, forming the single largest national park that we would have. Now, half of all the yards means half of your yard. This park would cover 20 million acres and be larger than a dozen of our current parks combined. We simply must be willing to do it. Here's a quotation from Doug. To put it bluntly, we are destroying the natural world that we cannot live without. It's not that we purposefully have nature in our sights. Rather, we simply refuse to share our spaces with the natural world. We have clung to the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist as if it were true, and it's not. And so, as our population has expanded, we have exiled nature more and more to parks and preserves that are too small, too few in number, and too isolated to sustain nature. Think about your own yard. Do you really like that vast, empty, expensive carpet of green that you have? Have you thought about having a yard that's filled with wildflowers, colorful, fragrant, nodding, hosting glittering butterflies? Think about spending your spare time casting your line into some calm waters, or sitting in the shade with a frosty cold one at your side. You know that the option is sweating over a deafening lawnmower or a string trimmer in an effort to keep up with the Joneses. You know, that's really the only reason to have that huge, empty, expensive carpet of green. It's to impress neighbors and passersby. How about if we impress nature? Okay, nature can be destructive. We've all seen that all too recently. You almost certainly lost plants in the storm. Many of you lost much more. But as you begin to put your life back together and replant your property, choose native plants. Embrace Doug Tallamy's philosophy of filling half your yard, at least half your yard, with native plants. Using native plants on your property will support Florida wildlife of all kinds. You can choose dozens of different features on your property: a butterfly and pollinator garden, a garden to attract and feed birds, a place to shelter wildlife, a pond for fish and frogs, or any combination of these. So what is a native plant? A native plant is one that was established within an ecosystem before European contact, which means it must have been in Florida before the 1500s. Amazingly, some 2,800 species of plants meet those criteria in Florida. Plants do not become native. The best example I can think of is Gaillardia. For many, many years, everybody assumed this was a native plant. It's only been within the last few years, maybe 3 to 5 years, that we discovered it is not a native plant, and it probably didn't enter Florida until around the 1700s. This is called a naturalized plant. And even though it's been here for maybe 500 years now, it's still not a native plant. It still always will be a naturalized plant. We're going to talk about some yards. This yard is nature's nightmare. This yard is half turf and half concrete. That vast expanse of concrete is going to reflect heat not only back on the house, but all over the whole neighborhood. The Florida sun is relentless. The other half of the yard is turf grass, and this is probably maintained by a lawn service, and it still doesn't look that good. Any little critter that was trying to live in that grass has probably perished long ago. It's probably filled with sides like pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Those tiny little shrubs that are marching up to the front door, they have been pruned within an inch of their life. There's barely anything left. And those two plants that are blocking the windows, yikes, they are sharp, pointy, dagger-like, and probably the least inviting plants I've ever seen. We can do better. How about this? Boy, Doug Tallamy would like this. Look at that. Dozens, maybe hundreds of flowers for pollinators, trees for birds to perch in, barely enough hardscape to get you to the front door, and not a single blade of turf grass. Okay, so we can't quite accomplish that, but we can do this. This happens to be a Midwest yard. It looks like it's about half grass and about half plants. Now, it would be so easy to turn this into a Florida yard. We can substitute Joe Pye weed for these tall allium. We can put a firebush here instead of peony. We can use liatris instead of veronica here. And we can use maypop passion flower on this trellis as a vine. I think we can do this. Now, there are lots of kinds of gardens that you can put in your yard, but it seems that almost everybody wants a sunny pollinator garden. They want the butterflies, they want the bees, they want all the little critters flitting around, and they want the bright colors. The first flower here is starry rosinweed. This gets about 4 feet tall. It dies back in the fall. It blooms profusely during the summertime. I recently had the pleasure of seeing an all-native yard that had a great big patch of starry rosinweed, and it had so many butterflies. It was wonderful. Unfortunately, look at the name of this. This is starry rosin weed. We might get better acceptance of native plants if we stop calling them weeds ourselves. I mean, think of it. We have Joe Pye weed, blue porterweed, pickerelweed, even milkweed. We need new names. Tropical sage and spotted bee balm in the center here are two plants that are virtually carefree. They are pollinator magnets, and they both reseed freely. If you start out with 1 or 2 of these plants, by the end of the season, you will have more. And by next year, you will have a really good sized patch. I have spotted bee balm outside the window where I sit to read. Every single day, all summer long, I can look out and see little bees, little tiny wasps. It was just an absolute joy. Trust me, this is a pollinator magnet. Firebush is probably the quintessential shrub that is recommended for pollinators. It has bright red and green leaves, bright red, yellow, and orange flowers. Every butterfly that I know of likes firebush. There is a great big firebush, probably 7 or 8 feet tall, at Clock Tower Gardens. And the last time I was there, it was absolutely laden with zebra longwings, which is our state butterfly. They were all over. I couldn't even begin to count how many there were. But maybe you don't have a lot of sun in your yard. Maybe you have shade. You can plant Shade-loving plants that have berries that will feed the birds naturally. No bird seed needed. Rouge plant is not the easiest native plant to grow. It takes a while to get established, but it does love the shade. I have seen large patches of rouge plant that were in the berry stage, and they were really beautiful. They were under a giant oak. American beautyberry, there is not another plant with berries this intense fuchsia color. We have a beautyberry, and I absolutely love it. The flowers are in early spring, and they are tiny and pink. Then they set berries, and you'll notice these berries grow right on the stem. They don't have individual stems the way blackberries do or strawberries do. They each grow just right on the stem, and birds do love these, mockingbirds especially. Softleaf wild coffee has a cousin called shiny leaf wild coffee. They love the shade. We have a couple of coffee plants on our property. They bloom in early spring, kind of before very much else is blooming, and the bees absolutely flock to them. Ours are nestled beside the sidewalk, and when we walked by them, we could just hear the plants humming with bees. It was just wonderful. Now, please do not try to roast these berries like coffee and drink them. Check out the Latin name, Psychotria nervosa. That's the first reason you don't want to do that. The second reason is if you insist and brew yourself a cup, it is not going to taste anything like what you think coffee ought to taste like. Finally, marlberry. This is an underused shrub in Florida. I have seen it in bloom, and it gets large clusters of white blossoms. They're probably 6 inches across, and they're like a mound. They're so pretty. Then the white blossoms turn into little green berries, which turn pink and burgundy, and finally into a dark purplish black. Next, we have a dry garden. If your land is not irrigated, if you have a lot of sun, if you don't like to water, you might be interested in a dry garden. Coral honeysuckle is a vine, and this particular vine happens to exhibit flowers before it has foliage. A little unusual, but it works. Hummingbirds like these long, tubular, coral-colored flowers, and I personally think the foliage is really attractive. It's kind of unusual. I like it. Rusty Lione grows in the scrub. If you've been to some of our scrub parks, which I'm sure you have, I'm sure you've seen this plant. The flowers of it are small white bells, not unlike lily of the valley. And the new growth is rusty in color. Imagine. Our lantana native comes in 2 colors. It comes in pale yellow and it comes in pale lavender. There are lots of commercially hybrid lantanas that are red and raspberry and peach and pink and lots of other colors. Unfortunately, our natives will interbreed with the hybrids easily. So if you want to put a lantana in your yard, please try to buy a native lantana. Finally, black-eyed Susan. What can I say about black-eyed Susan? It's been around for generations. Everybody loves it. Everybody knows what it is. And pollinators love it too. And when the petals are gone and the pollinators have had their fill, the birds eat the seeds in the fall. Opposite of a dry garden is a moist garden. You might be lucky enough to have a pond on your property, or a swale, or just a low spot in your yard. We have flowers for you. Buttonbush is a shrub, and it grows with really wet feet. I've seen it actually growing in the water, and it blooms. It gets these little white blossoms that look like Sputniks. They are just charming as heck. They're about the size of a golf ball, and you will be just delighted when it blooms. Scarlet rose mallow is the Florida version of a native hibiscus. It also grows in wet areas. It gets tall, probably 5 or 6 feet tall. The flowers are large and showy. They are 5 or 6 inches across, brilliant red. Climbing aster. I really don't know if climbing aster is a genuine vine or if it's just a plant that likes to climb, but climb it will. It'll go up a tree, it'll grow up a shrub, it'll grow up a trellis if you have a trellis. It blooms later in the season, probably August or September, and the blossoms are pale lavender, about 3 inches across, and the entire plant will be covered in these blossoms. It is not shy when it comes to blooming. It's got lots of flowers. Pickerelweed. Pickerelweed is the most beautiful shade of purple blue. I'm sure you've seen it in roadside swales. It's a native plant after all. It grows everywhere. A lot of HOAs plant them around the retention ponds simply because they're attractive. They don't go rampant and take over the entire pond. If you've ever seen pickerelweed, chances are you're not going to forget what it is. Now, if you have a moist spot in your yard or a low spot, you might be interested in rain control. The best thing to do is build a rain garden. All you have to do is strip away the turf. You hear that? Less grass. Plant some moisture-loving plants. Plant some flowers that love the moisture. Add a few rocks to help prevent erosion. Scatter around some gravel, and you have an instant rain garden. You have made a beautiful place out of a low spot in your yard where the grass probably wasn't going to grow anyway. If you don't have a low spot in your yard, you might just want to catch the rain that comes off your roof, save it in a rain barrel, and then use the rainwater to water your plants. UF-IFAS has rain barrel workshops, and we have a workshop coming up here in Northport. At the workshop, you can buy a rain barrel, you can learn how to install it, you can learn how to use it and how to maintain it. This workshop will be Saturday, November 19th at 10 a.m. at the Northport Mullins Center. You will need to register for this. You need to register at UF-IFAS. I believe they do most of theirs through Eventbrite. And you can learn about rain barrels. Most yards have a small area, even a small corner, that you can turn into a wild area. This is not hard to do. You put your shrub trimmings there, you let dead branches pile up there, you toss your leaves on the pile, and you leave it alone. Now, of course, the neighbors are going to appreciate it if you choose a corner that they can't see. You don't want them complaining about it. But you will attract everything from beetles and spiders to frogs and lizards. If your area is large enough, you may attract a rabbit. Remember water. Although it's not a kindness to feed the wildlife, it is a kindness to remember to water them. Put a large clay saucer on the ground, put some rocks in the bottom of it, and you will attract birds, frogs and toads, maybe rabbits, other ground-dwelling creatures. As a matter of fact, if you have the rocks sticking out just a little bit out of the water, you may even find bees and hummingbirds and butterflies at your water because they all need water during the long dry season we have here in Florida. It's like 7 months long. Now, if you have a bird bath, you do need to keep it clean, but you're going to get such joy out of it that it will not be a chore. Of course, there is nothing wrong with a traditional bird bath on a pedestal. You never know what you might attract. Hedges. I'm sure that as you have been driving around, seeing all the stacks of destruction wrought by Hurricane Ian. You've seen a lot of vinyl fences piled up by the side of the road, or you've seen them laying flat in the yard. We're asking that you skip the vinyl and instead plant natural hedges. What we recommend for a natural hedge is southern red cedar. Now, southern red cedar gets about 30 feet tall. I'm sure you don't want a hedge that big, but it takes trimming well. You can keep it pruned. You can keep it at 6 feet or 8 feet or however tall you want your hedge. After a couple of years, this is going to be completely impenetrable. No one can get through it. No one can see through it. It's going to be very dense. It will be a place where birds can nest. You might have rabbits under the hedge. You might have little field mice, but it's really a good hedge. If you prefer the look of a deciduous plant, we recommend cocoa plum. Yes, the Cocoa Plum Shopping Center has a cocoa plum hedge. It also tolerates pruning well. It fills in, gets very thick, very dense, provides nesting for birds, and cocoa plum actually has plums. They are small, thumb-sized purple plums. They're pretty tasty. They do have a really big seed in them. Okay, you're going to have some lawn. Doug Talamy says you can have half your yard in lawn, but you can make it easy on yourself. Mowing, mow less. Give your lawnmower a vacation. Or rest a little bit. Set the mower height a little taller. Let your lawn get a little shaggy. It's gonna be okay. Mix in ground covers with your turf grass. In the upper right is sunshine mimosa. We also recommend frog fruit. Both of these low-growing natives can tolerate foot traffic. They can be mowed a few times a year, and they will not be grass. You will have other plants mixed in with your turf grass. Chemicals. Please stop using landscape-wide chemicals and fertilizers. Now, if you use a lawn service, your lawn service is going to tell you that you have to have this and you have to have that, and you have to fertilize X number of times a year, and you don't want any of those nasty bugs, and so on. I can't blame him. I mean, they're trying to earn a living. However, if you can go a year, even several months without these treatments, you might find that you don't need these treatments at all. You will have earthworms that keep your lawn healthy. They aerate the soil. You will have all these little grubs and beetles. You will have pupas that turn into butterflies and moths. And you will have a much healthier underground mycorrhizal network. Add plants. You can add trees in clusters of 2 or 3. It will improve their wind resistance. Plant shrubs beneath your trees. Now, if you think that your yard is too small to plant all these trees and all these shrubs, let me tell you about my yard. I live on a cul-de-sac and I have a pie-shaped lot, and it's not a particularly large lot. When we moved here, we had a builder-supplied holly. We had half a live oak because it's planted on the property line between us and the neighbor. We had, a whole lot of those lovely green and yellow arbicolas that the whole world has. We had the, jasmine, and we had some viburnum. Well, we've lived here 5 years, and I finally started adding natives. We now have a pignut hickory, 2 red maples, a Walter's viburnum, a Simpson stopper, 2 coffee plants, 2 firebush, a beautyberry, assorted wildflowers, And we still have the viburnum, but I've gotten rid of the arbicola. So if I can do that on my yard, you can do that on your yard. Mulch. Mulch is your friend. Mulch are on your trees, your shrubs, and your flower beds. Mulch helps keep down the weeds. Mulch helps hold in the moisture, and it's actually pretty attractive. Invasives. Learn to recognize and remove invasive plants. This, of course, is Brazilian pepper. I'm sure that almost all of you recognize this. If you're sensitive to poison ivy, you may be sensitive to Brazilian pepper, so be careful. I was not sensitive to poison ivy. Excuse me. However, I got into Brazilian pepper. I went through a couple of rounds of antibiotics, a couple of rounds of steroids, a few tubes of grease and goo and cream, and so be careful. When you remove your invasives, please put them in the trash, not in yard waste bags. Those berries, that's another word for seeds. If you put those in yard waste bags, they are going to germinate. A lot of plants can regenerate from only a couple inches of stem or a couple inches of root. So do us all a favor and put them in the trash instead. Now that I have convinced you all to buy native plants and to replant your yard with native plants, you'd probably like to know where to go. There are 3 native plant nurseries that are closest to us that we recommend. The first one is Florida Native Plants in Sarasota. This is at the end of Fruitville Road. Take Fruitville Road off I-75 and drive to the end. And drive and drive and drive and drive to the end. And finally, you will see a small little sign that says Florida Native Plants Nursery. Mangrove has a long-standing relationship with Laurel and Annie Schiller. They provide plants for our Plant Native Day. They have given talks at our Plant Native Day. They have come to our meetings. They give great advice, and they're wonderful people to work with. Sweet Bay Nursery is up in Parrish. It's about an hour's drive. If you're looking for a spa for your soul, go to Sweet Bay. Sweet Bay is set out in the country. It is surrounded by giant oaks and tall pines. It has wide aisles that are easy to walk. The plants are arranged in tidy rows. And just in general, it is a calm, peaceful, wonderful place. I recommend a visit here. The stress just sort of drains out of you. The All Native Garden Center in Fort Myers is near the airport, and it's in a residential area, and take your GPS. It's really easy to get lost and to be unable to find this one. This nursery and garden center has crammed an unbelievable number of native plants into a small area. They have one lot. They have expanded into the back half of the lot next door, which I assume is where they live. They have even set up ponds where they are growing mangroves in water. It's just amazing. They also have on site a cotton plant, which I had never seen before. It's not for sale, but they have a cotton plant there. Now, I have to say, all 3 of these nurseries were in the path of Hurricane Ian. They may have been damaged. I have not been to any since the storm. They may be sold out as people try to replant their yards with native plants. So if you're up for a road trip, go to plantrealflorida.org. This is the website of the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. And they have a list of every single native plant nursery in the state of Florida. Plan a road trip, put a waterproof something down in the back of your car, and plan to buy some native plants. I'd like to invite everybody to join us at our meeting at 1:30 next Tuesday, November 8th at the Northport Library. Our speaker is going to be the one and only Barbara Lockhart. And on the other side here, we have our contact information. That's our website. We are on Facebook. All you have to do is search for Mangrove Chapter and you will find us on Facebook. And that is my personal email.